Moshek over the Tehom in the Hebrew. And so you have deep and darkness. And that's the lower register situation. But the Spirit is there, the pattern of a wonderful new architectural cosmic triumph that's going to unfold even in the visible world. And as a result, therefore, in the subsequent days, we see that the deep gets founded and the darkness as well. And these are turned into a magnificent cosmic temple of the Lord. The heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool, all part of God's great cosmic house. And that story is told then in verses 3 through 31. And here we'll be arguing that the heavenly register is brought out by the fiats. Now, we said that the form of Genesis 1 is somewhat poetic, for one thing, because it is divided into a series of strophes or stanzas, each of which has the format of let there be, and there was, fiat and fulfillment. Let there be. Who said that? Where? This is God speaking. Huh? Where is God? God is on his throne up in heaven, in the midst of his angels. And yes, the angels, because even while this visible register is in process of developing right from the beginning, the invisible heavens have been established with the angels already present there as part of that. Angels are developed as a total community. They are not as humankind. They don't become a race through a genealogical process of development, but there the whole company is produced as such from the hand of God. They are there, and in the midst of those angels, God on his throne, together with them looking down at the lower register, says, now what's the next thing we're going to do down there? Let there be this, let there be light. And in response to that sovereign fiat in heaven, let there be, and it was down below. And so the series of fulfillments take you to back down to the lower register. The structure, in other words, of the book of Genesis from beginning to end is one of alternating between upper and lower registers, with the primary perspective, of course, being not the lower one, although the story of the earth is in fact being told from that anthropocentric perspective of man as one who can't experience heaven yet, not until he's glorified later on. But the dominant perspective of the storyline in Genesis 1 is that we are sitting with God in heaven, where he is there together, as Proverbs 8 put it, with his wisdom, his architect, and he is proceeding to structure the world by a series of sovereign creative words. Let there be, let there be. And so all of those fiats position us up on the upper register with God. Before then, we move back down to earth for the fulfillment. And, of course, one of those along the line, ultimately, in connection with day 6, is when God says, let us make man in our image. That particular fiat brings out the upper register perspective very clearly. And we'll have to say more about that tricky verse later on when we're talking about man as the image of God as a special subject. And there, of course, that language will be very important, where God says, let us make man in our own image and in our likeness. And so that let us is an important clue to the fact that what we are looking at is God in heaven in the midst of the angels who explain the us, to whom is God speaking at that point. When we get to discuss that at more length, we'll go through all of the passages in the Bible, there aren't that many, that have this peculiar form of consultative expression where God says to someone else, evidently, let us. Even on the more traditional view, that the let us is to be understood in terms of a communication among the persons of the Trinity. In fact, on the traditional view, even more so, I guess, that let us would signalize that we are up there with God in his heaven, the persons of the Trinity. As a matter of fact, I don't think that is the right interpretation of the let us. I think the biblical evidence is overwhelming that wherever you find that us, it has to do with the fact that angels are present. Angels are present, and there is the phenomenon of the heavenly council. The whole picture is the royal picture of God's heavenly court where he sits enthroned, and in his heavenly court, the members of the divine council sit there with him. And in fact, in Psalm 82, the way that is expressed is that God is called Elohim, and he takes his place in the judgment scene in the midst of the Elohim, the angels, who just because they are there and sharing in this royal rule with him, are also called Elohim-like creatures. As in fact, later on in that psalm, human beings, men on earth, are also called Elohim because they, made in God's image, are also engaged in judgment. But the point is then, briefly, that the let us at that point brings before us this biblical picture of the heavenly council chamber of God seated with the midst of his angels. Let us make man in our image, and then he is made the fulfillment. Is man lower register made in the image of God. That brings us just about to the end then of Genesis 6, except for the seventh day. And there what I'm saying comes to its clearest expression of all, perhaps. We come to God's seventh day, which is that unending Sabbath. And then we read in Genesis 2, verses 2 and 3 there, how that God blessed that seventh day, that Sabbath day, as it expressed in Exodus 20, where the word Sabbath is substituted for 11, for seventh. And God blessed that seventh day, that Sabbath, and he hallowed it, which of course is referring to the earthly ordinance of the Sabbath. How should we put it? The ordinance of the Sabbath, which is the replicated. It's an illustration of that process that says that it forms the whole relationship, that the upper world is replicating itself, producing images to reflect its glory in the lower world. But in any case, the seventh day, and God's own resting on the seventh day, is precisely the picture of God on his heavenly throne. So that throughout the story then, in the account in Genesis 1, it's all told from the point of view of the two registers alternating back and forth throughout, with the primary orientation being that we are with God looking down upon the creation process. Now that's the nature then of biblical cosmology, that it recognizes these two levels of things, and we're pointing out here how that principle affects the structure of Genesis 1. It is found also, as I point out in this article, elsewhere in the Bible. Remember the beginning of the book of Job, the prologue to the book of Job, how it's structured? Precisely the same way, with alternating heavenly and earthly scenes. And the heavenly scenes then are describing exactly what we were just talking about, the divine council situation. That's one of the key passages to look to in the scriptures when you're trying to develop this biblical idea of the heavenly council is the prologue in the book of Job. There was a day when the sons of God, the angels are the sons of God, just as men spiritually are the sons of God. And as we just said in Psalm 82, it's because angels as well as men are the sons of God, that both angels and men are like God, all called Elohim. That refers to the divine likeness that's involved. So there was a day then when the angels, these sons of God, are gathering together clearly for some decretive judicial function. Satan comes among them. We're in the register, I think. Satan comes among them, and he is seeking permission, this dog on a leash, for God to extend his leash somewhat so he can do such and such to Job, and such permissions are given to him. And that having been done, now we're brought back to the lower register. You see Satan at work in the world, and Job being tested, and then back again to the heavenly register another day. But back and forth, the narrative goes, all bringing out the fundamental thought, of course, too, that God reigns in heaven, and whatever goes on earth is in terms of His counsel and His decrees that are taking place up there. So that lower register reality is something the Bible is very much aware of, and that God's people should be aware of the reality of it, that we can't see it, but it is, talk about real, it's just as real as the dimensions of things that we can see. It's not less real, the fact that we can't get in on it. In another place where you have that same alternating pattern on a big scale is the book of Revelation, coming back to the book of Revelation. Repeatedly, as the book of Revelation details the various catastrophes and so on that God is going to bring upon this world to judge the nations and also to judge His apostate church, that Babylon harlot that develops out of Jerusalem. And repeatedly as it does that, it begins by bringing us up into heaven. As we said earlier, John finds himself in the Spirit up in heaven. And what does he see when he's up there? Well, for example, in Revelation 4 and 5, he's up there in heaven, and this whole big picture we're talking about, the invisible heaven, God on His throne, surrounded by the divine counsel of all the encircling angels and the hosts of heaven up there, and who has prevailed to open the book, and he weeps because but there is the Lamb. And but the heavenly scene is the control center of the universe, and it's from there that historical events have developed then back on earth. And so the Lamb prevails up there to open the seventh seal of the book, and as he does that in the upper register, then the four horsemen of the apocalypse go galloping forth into the world below, and so on, all the way through the book of Revelation. It has this upper register, lower register, which is so helpful to enlarge our vision of the world and to reassure us that our God, our Savior, seated at the right hand of glory up there, is ruling over all of these things. That's a tremendous message to strengthen God's people on church based on the wiles and malice of the devil, that we should have an appreciation of this. Well, that then is what I suggest is what's going on here in Genesis 1. And so ultimately, we'll go into detail some of this, but in terms of our argument about the chronological data in Genesis 1 as to whether it's figurative or literal, the thing that will emerge from all of this is that the formula which mentions the succession of days, which is just part of the formula that begins, and it was evening, and it was morning, day 1, it was evening, morning, day 2. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about the figurative chronological framework in Genesis 1, that is precisely what we are talking about. It's a simple question of whether that simple refrain line, and it was evening, and it was morning, day, whatever, that closing signature for each of the strophes. That's the way each of these little day stanzas end, with this closing signature. It was evening, it was morning, day 1. We're talking about that, and we're saying that is the chronological framework for Genesis, and our whole question is should that formula, that refrain, be understood literally or figuratively? Is it describing life down here on earth, where days are measured by the sun, solar days, or is this language which is being used for the reality of God's creation time up there, where days are not measured by the relationship of the sun to the earth? In other words, where that kind of language of a week of days is a figure of speech derived from this lower world which has been so produced that God has filled it with all kinds of natural figures and metaphors that can be applied then to illuminate that realm which otherwise is beyond our perceiving and understanding. That's the question, which does it refer to? And what we'll be demonstrating is that refrain formula, the chronological data, are describing what's going on up there in the heavenly realm. Now that's what we'll be trying to do. And now let me go back and work toward it. And we're not going to begin to finish what we want to say about this. So we'll be continuing, but at least I hope you'll see that it's not just a matter of prolonging this discussion of the length of the days of Genesis or their sequence. We are talking about much bigger issues that I hope that you see the importance of. Well, what to do here? Let's deal with the upper and lower registers in terms of there being spatial realities. And okay, Van Til. All right. Two circles. Everyone knows Van Til. Two circles. Basic distinction: Creator, God, eternity. Creation down here. Not a monistic system where creation gets merged in with God and God with, but the basic creator. Creature distinction is something that has to be maintained clearly. And how does heaven and earth relate to this distinction? We were saying yesterday how very commonly heaven, as it's described in the Bible, the place of God's peculiar dwelling where he is enthroned in the divine court up there in the midst of the angels, is so often identified with God's eternity. Well, see, that already is guilty of blending and confusing the creator circle with the creation circle. No. This is all part of creation. So first of all, we distinguish then between eternity apart from creation, where God is. And now what Genesis 1 is doing is taking us in the expression in the beginning to the interface between eternity and the space-time continuum here of creation. And it is describing what comes into being this side of as a result of God's ultimate fiat there at the beginning of let there be the heavens and the earth. So that's a first thing to get clear, that this isn't describing God's eternal state. This is describing, just in terms of something even spatial, this is describing a realm that God creates and within which then he manifests himself, and he does various things then that are described. So this becomes a created theater for the revelation of the divine glory. God is all glorious in eternity, and the Father and the Son and the Spirit, it's a whole pattern of a continuing. He's the God of glory, and the Son is revealing the glory of the Father, and the Spirit is proceeding from the Father is also revealing the glory of the. These things are going on in eternity, but now what is going on here in heaven is something other than that. It is a created reality, but here once again, the created heaven, the invisible one, is the heavenly temple. It's the realm where God sovereignty is expressed in his enthronement there and his control over all things. And so that is the upper register. That is the invisible heavens that we were talking about. And over against that, down on earth, there is another element within the cosmos. Here's the cosmos that is produced. Pagan Sagan, is the cosmos, is all that there is. So Pagan Sagan says this is all that there is, then, because there's no room for that up there. It goes for Pagan Hawkins too. They have no room for that. So we want to be insistent that these two are different things, and to have a proper place for God within this. And the way it works out then is that God in his invisible heavens is producing a world below, which is an earthly reproduction, turns out, of the heavenly reality. Now, God in his glory, what happens when he creates the world? He creates Eden, he puts man in it. What's the nature of Eden? Later on we'll be talking about this in more detail too. But what's the nature of Eden here on this lower register? In the midst of it, according to Ezekiel, there's the mountain of God. Mountain in Hebrew, Har. And this mountain of God concept then is described later on by the language Har Moed. Har Moed meaning Mount of Assembly, like the tent. The tent is called the Ohel Moed, the tent of assembly. What it is that the heavenly divine assembly is reproduced here on the lower register at Mount Zion later on, which is Har Moed, or in the Greek form, Armageddon. That's what Armageddon is. It's the mountain of God, it's the mountain of assembly. And that's produced in the Garden of Eden already. And Zion is crowned by the glory of God. The sunset. So as you conceive of the Garden of Eden, I think that's the way you conceptualize it, as a place where life and worship is focused on the glory of God as revealed there on the mountain of God in Eden. And that, as I say, is the picture that I think emerges as you see the way prophets later on refer to this phenomenon. The glory of God is a funneling down. How did that glory appear on the mountain of God in Eden? I think the way it appeared on later on Zion. How did it appear on Zion or on Sinai? In the form of that glory cloud. The glory, the Shekinah, the glory cloud. Now that, I think, is the original situation in Eden. That is what God reproduces down there on the lower register, on the earth. And it is a replica then of the heavenly reality. God in his glory, in the midst of his counsel, there on the mountain of God. It's not the full thing, because it's not in terms of those glory dimensions that we cannot see, but it is an expression of the glory realities of heaven in terms of the four-dimensional reality that we can perceive, and the glory cloud was such a phenomenon. So it is symbolic. It is a copy. It is an antitype in the sense of corresponding to the heaven as the original, but that's what it is. And so what Eden is the temple of God. It's a paradise, to be sure. Sure, because heaven is a paradise. It's a place of great blessing, and so Eden, the lower register, is as well. But heaven is the temple of God. It's a holy place. And so where Adam and Eve are originally placed, it's also a holy place, which they as priests are given the function of guarding. That's their priestly mandate, is to guard this place precisely because it is an earthly sanctuary, which is a reproduction of heaven on earth, and God symbolically in the glory cloud is present among them. They fail, and they're driven out of this place, and their function is taken over by those beings who surround and guard the heavenly temple of God up there, the cherubim and so on, are now given this function of guarding this place. The fact that it is thus guarded by these holy beings also serves then to identify that that's what it had been all along. So Eden then is a holy temple on earth, which is an earthly reproduction then of that heavenly reality. That's what is taking place here. Now we keep talking then about the invisible heaven, the upper register, and the lower heaven, all as part of the cosmos, and so they are. And in your thinking, how do you think about it? Do you think of the invisible heavens as something which is located over there, maybe far over there, someplace out from where we are on planet Earth? Or maybe it's even outside of the cosmos, and if you look through the literature, you'll find all kinds of well-meaning and informed, even Christian people talking that way about it, as though heaven is somewhere else outside of the cosmos, or at least far off, as it were, in outer space from it. That is, I don't think, physical thinking. Heaven is right here. The invisible heaven occupies all of the cosmos, just as the visible one does, and therefore it isn't that God or Jesus or the angels are way off, that you'd have to be in a spaceship and travel for 1,000 years to get there, but maybe they can cover that distance a little faster, hopefully, or something like that. No. They all are together, and then that, of course, is the difficulty of describing then their relationship, and we just end up the way we have been, and speaking those in terms of dimensions that we can't perceive. Maybe you could compare it to the way in which there are all kinds of sounds that are present here, different pitches and of sound, and yet you can't hear them all. Your dog can hear higher pitched sounds than you can, you see. So it's simply a question of the equipment that you have at the time, whether you can perceive or not, the things that are actually present. And so these dimensions of the glory realm up there are here, but they're too high-pitched or whatever, you see, for us to detect when we're glorified. Then, like our dog will be able to hear those things, then we'll be able to see them. Well, as we said, we're getting into some larger questions, and we'll have to take them from there. Is there some lunch that is not only the prospective students are going to the lunch? Sorry, you can't go to that lunch, but at least you can go to your own lunch.
Another transfiguration, sort of an intrusion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like the cloud in the Old Testament. Right.